I'm Helen, 32 female. I live alone in a small, two-bedroom bungalow in a quiet suburban neighborhood. For the last 6 years, I've worked as a senior data analyst for a major tech firm, a job that allows me to work from home, surrounded by the comforting silence of spreadsheets and code. My life is a carefully curated ecosystem of order and predictability, a stark contrast to the chaotic family I grew up in. This is the story of how I finally dismantled that ecosystem, not with a bang, but with a signature on a dotted line, all because of a single, entitled demand made over a plate of pot roast. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. In my family, roles were assigned early and permanently etched in stone. My younger brother, Ethan, was the golden child. My parents, Margaret and Mark, were his adoring audience. And I was the scapegoat, or perhaps more accurately, the support beam, the quiet, structural element that was only noticed if it failed to hold everything up. Ethan, at 29, was an aspiring graphic designer, a title he'd held for nearly a decade. It was a romantic way of saying he was perpetually unemployed, jumping between unpaid internships, passion projects that never materialized, and freelance gigs that barely covered his expenses for a week. He was charming, charismatic, and possessed an almost magical ability to convince my parents that his big break was just around the corner. Every setback was just a setup for a future comeback, every poor decision a learning experience on his artistic journey. My journey, on the other hand, was expected to be linear and practical. While Ethan was given a brand new car for his 18th birthday to find himself on a cross-country road trip, I was given a bus schedule and a lecture on the importance of saving for a reliable used vehicle. While his university tuition for a fine arts degree was paid for without question, I was expected to cover half of my own for a degree in statistics, working 2 part-time jobs and applying for every scholarship I could find. My parents called it building character. I called it what it was, a double standard. The unspoken rule was that Ethan's dreams were an investment, my stability was an expectation. My achievements were met with lukewarm acknowledgement. Graduating with honors. That's nice, dear. Ethan just designed a wonderful poster for the local bake sale. Getting my first major promotion? That's great. Did you hear Ethan is thinking of starting a podcast? Buying my own house at 28? This one was the biggest non-event of all. It was a milestone born of years of frugal living, of saying no to vacations and nights out, of pouring every spare dollar into a down payment. I was immensely proud of my little bungalow. It was modest, but it was mine. It was my sanctuary, the one place on earth where I wasn't the support beam, but the architect. To my parents, my house was less of a personal achievement and more of a convenient asset. "Oh, Helen's place is so close to that great butcher shop," my mom would say. Or, "We can just drop these extra boxes at Helen's, she has the space." My spare room became an unofficial storage unit for their seasonal decorations and Ethan's failed hobbies. A pottery wheel, a set of DJ turntables, an easel still spattered with dried paint. My role was to be accommodating, to nod and smile and make space. Any pushback was met with sighs and accusations of being difficult or ungrateful. "We just need a little help, Helen. It's what family does." The dynamic was exhausting, but for years I played my part. I craved their approval, a crumb of the unconditional praise they showered on Ethan. I thought if I was responsible enough, successful enough, and helpful enough, they would eventually see me. They would see Helen, their daughter, not just Helen, the reliable backup plan. It was a foolish hope, a childish dream I couldn't seem to shake. The Sunday dinners were the stage where this play was performed each week. I'd drive the 20 minutes to their house, steeling myself for the inevitable monologue about Ethan's latest venture or crisis. My dad, Mark, a man who spent his days as an accountant meticulously balancing ledgers, seemed incapable of seeing the emotional imbalance in his own home. He'd sit at the head of the table, a quiet, passive king in a kingdom where his son was the crown prince. My mom, Margaret, a retired nurse, ran the house with a mix of cloying affection for Ethan and prescriptive instructions for me. She'd fuss over Ethan's plate while asking me why I looked tired or if I was still single. A few months ago, the crisis was Ethan's car breaking down. He couldn't afford the repairs, so he had to use my car for 3 weeks, leaving me to navigate a series of inconvenient bus routes. You work F. Rom home, Helen, my mother had said, as if my time and freedom were disposable. Ethan needs to get to his networking events. I didn't fight it. I rearranged my schedule, endured the hassle, and felt a familiar knot of resentment tighten in my stomach. When I got my car back, the gas tank was empty, and there was a new dent on the passenger side door that Ethan claimed he knew nothing about. No thank you, no apology. It was simply expected. Last month, it was his rent. He was being evicted from his trendy downtown apartment because he was 3 months behind. He'd spent his rent money on a new, top-of-the-line computer because, he argued, you have to invest in the tools of the trade. The frantic call came from my mother, not him. Helen, you have to help. Your brother is going to be on the street. The subtext was clear. Your savings, your responsible budgeting, should be the safety net for his irresponsibility. I caved. I transferred him the money, a sum that made my stomach churn, knowing it would never be paid back. He accepted it not with gratitude, but with the casual air of someone collecting a debt. These incidents were the bricks in the wall that was slowly being built between my family and me. I just didn't realize how high that wall had become until that final Sunday dinner. I went that day expecting the usual performance. I had no idea it was the day they would finally demand not just a piece of my life, but the entire foundation of it. The aroma of pot roast and roasted potatoes filled my parents' house, a scent that used to mean comfort but now just felt like the preamble to a negotiation I was destined to lose. I walked in and placed my token offering, a bottle of wine, on the kitchen counter. My mother, Margaret, turned from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron. Helen, you're here. Ethan's in the living room. He has the most exciting news. Her eyes sparkled with a familiar second-hand pride. I forced a smile and went into the living room. Ethan was sprawled on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, gave me a lazy grin, and said, "Hey, sis, brace yourself, big things are happening." My father, Mark, looked up from his newspaper in the armchair, a placid smile on his face. "Your brother's really onto something this time," he said, his voice full of unearned confidence. This was the opening act, the standard warm-up. For the next 20 minutes, Ethan detailed his latest venture. He was pivoting from graphic design to becoming a brand consultant and social media influencer. He spoke in a flurry of buzzwords: synergy, disruption, personal branding. That sounded impressive but signified nothing. He'd spent the last of my loan on a weekend seminar in the city that had, apparently, changed his life. Now, he was ready to launch his own consultancy. The only problem, he explained, was that he needed a relaunch phase. A period to get his portfolio together, build his online presence, and live rent-free while he focused all his energy on his new career. I nodded along, offering non-committal sounds of encouragement. Wow, that's great. Sounds interesting. I knew my role: be the supportive sister, the silent investor in his revolving door of dreams. We moved to the dining room, the table set with the good china as it always was on Sundays. The conversation was light as my mother brought out the food. We talked about the weather, a neighbor's new puppy, my father's golf game. It was a carefully constructed illusion of normalcy, the calm before the storm. I should have seen it coming. The overly cheerful atmosphere, the exciting news, it was all a deliberate setup. My mother sat down, placed her napkin on her lap, and looked at me with a beaming smile. "Well, with all this change, we've come up with the perfect solution to help Ethan get back on his feet," she announced to the table. "It's really the most sensible plan." My father nodded in agreement, already cutting into his roast beef. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a smug look on his face. He knew what was coming. He was in on it. This wasn't a discussion, it was a verdict, and I was the only one who hadn't seen the evidence. "What plan is that?" I asked, a sense of dread slowly creeping up my spine. Margaret looked at me as if she were offering me the greatest gift in the world. "Well, since you have that spare bedroom and you work from home anyway, it's sorted. Your brother's moving into your place." She clapped her hands together lightly, as if the matter was settled. "It'll just be for a few months. 6, maybe 8 at the most. Just while he gets his business off the ground. It's perfect. He'll have a quiet place to work, and you won't be all alone in that house anymore." The air left my lungs. I stared at her, then at my father, who was chewing his potatoes, avoiding my gaze. I looked at Ethan, who was watching me with an expectant smirk. He genuinely believed this was his due. They all did. They had discussed it, planned it, and were now presenting it to me not as a question, but as a statement of fact. They hadn't asked if I would be willing to house my brother. They had decided that I would. My home, my sanctuary, was being requisitioned. I felt a dizzying rush of anger and disbelief. All the years of being the responsible one, the one who planned and saved and sacrificed, it was all for this. To become a free boarding house for my coddled brother. You're joking, right?" I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. My mother's smile faltered. "Don't be dramatic, Helen. It's the logical solution. Why would we pay for another apartment for him when you have a perfectly good room sitting empty?" "It's not empty," I said, my voice growing stronger. "It's my office, the room I work in every single day, the reason I can afford my house in the first place." "Oh, you can work at the kitchen table," she waved her hand dismissively. "You're being difficult. This is about family helping family. Your brother needs this. It's your turn to step up and support him." My turn? I wanted to scream. When was it ever not my turn? When had I ever not stepped up? I paid for his rent, I lent him my car, I swallowed my resentment at every family dinner. What more could they possibly demand? They had their answer. They demanded my home. "Ethan can't live with us," my father finally chimed in, speaking to his plate. "Your mother and I are retired. We need our peace and quiet. You're young, you can handle the disruption." The hypocrisy was staggering. They had created this dependent, entitled man-child, and now that he was an inconvenience to their peaceful retirement, they were outsourcing the responsibility to me. I was the designated handler of the problem they had spent 29 years cultivating. "I can't believe this," I said, pushing my chair back. "You can't just decide who lives in my house. It's my house." Ethan finally spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. "Come on, Helen, don't be so selfish. It's a huge house for one person. What's the big deal? It'll be fun. We can hang out." Fun? He thought this would be fun. He envisioned me continuing to go to work every day while he slept in, used my things, ate my food, and pursued his dream without a single care in the world. The audacity of it all was breathtaking. It was an indecent proposal, cloaked in the language of family duty. They weren't asking me, they were informing me of my new obligation. My silence, my years of quiet compliance, had led them to believe they had the right to do this. They had mistaken my patience for permission. And as I sat there, staring at their expectant faces, I realized something with terrifying clarity. As long as I owned that house, it would never truly be mine. It would always be their backup plan, their safety net, their emergency resource, and I would never be free. I left the dinner in a daze, the half-eaten meal on my plate, a symbol of the conversation that had been so abruptly concluded. I'd mumbled something about not feeling well, a feeble excuse that no one bothered to question. They probably assumed I was just having a moment and would come around, as I always did. My mother even had the nerve to call out as I left, "Think about it, dear. Ethan can start moving his things next weekend." There was no room for negotiation in her mind. The decision was final. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and simmering rage. I walked into my quiet, peaceful house, and the silence, which usually brought me comfort, felt fragile, as if it could be shattered at any moment. I saw my home through their eyes, not as the culmination of my hard work, but as a resource to be exploited. My office wasn't a workspace, it was Ethan's future bedroom. My living room wasn't my private sanctuary, it was his future entertainment space. The betrayal felt like a physical presence in the room, suffocating me. The next morning, the campaign began. My mother texted me a photo of a desk she'd seen online. Wouldn't this be perfect for Ethan's room? Not too expensive. She was already decorating my home for its new inhabitant. There was no, "How are you feeling?" or "Can we talk about this?" It was a full steam-ahead tactical operation. I didn't reply. An hour later, she called. I ignored it. It went to voicemail. "Helen, it's your mother. I was just thinking, we should probably clear out that pottery wheel and those other things of Ethan's from your spare room to make space for his bed. When is a good day for your father and me to come over with the truck?" Her tone was breezy and efficient, as if we were planning a surprise party instead of a hostile takeover of my life. The blueprints of their betrayal became clearer with every message and call. They had no respect for my boundaries because, in their world, I wasn't entitled to any. My life was a subsidiary of the larger family corporation, and my assets were to be liquidated for the benefit of the primary shareholder, Ethan. I spent the day in a state of anxious paralysis, unable to work, just staring at my screen. Every email notification made me jump, thinking it was another logistical question from my mother about the invasion. Around lunchtime, a text from Ethan himself came through. "Hey, do you still have that 50-inch TV? Thinking it would be better in the living room than my old one. You cool with that?" He wasn't even moving in yet, and he was already rearranging the furniture and claiming my possessions. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement was what finally broke my paralysis and replaced it with a cold, hard resolve. I needed to talk to someone who was unequivocally on my side. I called my best friend, Millie. "Hey," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Are you free? I think my family just tried to colonize my house." Millie, a lawyer with a razor-sharp mind and zero tolerance for nonsense, met me at a coffee shop half an hour later. As I laid out the story, the Sunday dinner, my mother's texts, Ethan's TV request, her expression went from sympathetic to incredulous to furious. "They what?" she said, her coffee cup hitting the saucer with a clatter. "Helen, no, absolutely not. This isn't family helping family. This is a parasitic relationship, and you are the host. They have been draining you for years, and now they want to move into the bloodstream." Hearing someone else articulate my feelings so clearly was a relief. "I know, but what do I do? If I say no, they'll make my life a living nightmare. They'll guilt-trip me, call me selfish, turn the entire extended family against me." "Let them," Millie said, leaning forward. "Their opinion is not your responsibility. Your peace of mind is. Helen, you're a lawyer's best friend, so you're going to get some free and very blunt legal advice. That house is your property. Your name is on the deed. They have zero legal right to it. Their only power over you is the emotional hold they've cultivated your entire life. It's time to cut the strings." "Cut the strings?" I asked. "What does that even mean? I can't just cut off my family." "It doesn't mean you have to disown them, not yet anyway," she clarified. "It means you have to establish a boundary so clear and so absolute that they can't cross it. A simple no isn't going to work with them. They'll see it as a negotiation. You say no, they'll counter with, 'How about just for 3 months?' You need to create a situation where no is the only possible answer. A situation where it's no longer your decision to make." We talked for another hour. Millie helped me see the pattern I had been blind to for years. Every time I had given in, with the car, the rent, the endless emotional support, I wasn't buying peace. I was just paying a deposit on future, larger demands. I had trained them to believe that my resources were their resources. My house wasn't the last straw, it was the logical conclusion of a lifetime of conditioning. "They see you as an extension of themselves," Millie said, stirring her cold coffee. "They don't respect you as a separate, autonomous adult. You need to do something that forces them to see that, something irreversible." I left the coffee shop with a new sense of clarity. The anger hadn't dissipated, but now it was focused. It was a cold, clean energy. The blueprints of their betrayal were laid out before me, but Millie had just handed me a new set of plans, my own. I went home and looked around my house again. The fragile sanctuary didn't feel so fragile anymore. It felt like a fortress, and I wasn't going to let them lay siege to it. I was going to dismantle it myself, on my own terms, and build a new one somewhere they could never find the key. The campaign of texts and calls from my mother continued into the evening, but I no longer felt dread. I felt nothing at all. I was already calculating my escape. The decision, once made, settled in my mind with the quiet certainty of a solved equation. For my entire life, I had reacted to my family's whims. Now, for the first time, I was going to be proactive. My escape wouldn't be loud or confrontational. It would be silent, swift, and utterly final. It would be a data-driven solution to an emotional problem. The first step was to understand my assets. As a data analyst, this was my comfort zone. I spent that Monday evening not agonizing over my family's next move, but poring over my own financial records. I calculated my mortgage balance, my home's estimated market value, my savings, and my investment portfolio. The numbers on the screen were empowering. They were a tangible representation of my independence, a life I had built for myself, line by line, dollar by dollar. My house, which had suddenly felt like a liability, a tether to my family's dysfunction, was in fact my greatest asset and my ticket to freedom. The market was hot. I could sell quickly and for a significant profit. The next morning, I called a real estate agent. Not just any agent, but the best one in my area, a woman known for her efficiency and discretion. I explained the situation briefly, framing it as a desire for a quick, off-market sale to avoid the hassle of open houses. I needed this done quietly. She understood completely. "A private sale is definitely an option," she said. "Let me do some research on comparable properties. I'll have a number for you by tomorrow." While I waited, I started the second phase of my plan, disentanglement. It began with my phone. I went into my settings and created a custom filter. All calls and texts from my mother, father, and Ethan would now be silenced. They wouldn't be blocked. I still wanted a record of their attempts to contact me, but my phone would no longer buzz with their demands. The immediate silence was blissful. It was like an oppressive background noise I hadn't realized there had suddenly been switched off. Next, I tackled the physical front. Ethan's leftover, hobby equipment in my spare room, now my home office again, had to go. I spent the afternoon hauling the heavy pottery wheel, the dusty turntables, and the paint-stained easel out to my garage. I took photos of each item and posted them on a local marketplace website for free. "Must pick up today," the ad read. Within 2 hours, a parade of grateful strangers had cleared out every last trace of his transient ambitions. As a young art student gleefully loaded the easel into her car, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I was reclaiming my space, 1 square foot at a time. I also began to research new places to live. I looked at apartments for rent in a neighborhood closer to the city, a place my family rarely visited. The idea of a new address, one they didn't know, was intoxicating. I could have a home that was truly mine, a place they couldn't just drop by or mentally earmark for their own use. I bookmarked a few promising listings. The real estate agent called back the next day with a number that exceeded my expectations. The value of my house had appreciated significantly. "I have a young couple in mind," she said. "They've been looking in this exact neighborhood for months and keep getting outbid. They're pre-approved and want to move fast. If you're serious, I think we can have an offer in your hand by the end of the week." "I'm serious," I said, my voice steady. "Let's do it." Throughout this process, a strange thing happened to the guilt I had anticipated feeling. It never came. I had expected to be wrestling with a sense of familial duty, to hear my mother's voice in my head calling me selfish. But there was nothing. The audacity of their proposal had been a powerful antidote to a lifetime of conditioned guilt. They hadn't just asked for a favor, they had tried to seize control of my life, my finances, and my home. My response wasn't selfish, it was self-preservation. It was the logical outcome of their actions. My friend Millie was my rock during this time. I updated her every evening. "They've gone completely silent," I told her on Wednesday. "After I didn't respond to any of their calls or texts for 2 days, it's just nothing, it's eerie." "It's a tactic," Millie explained. "First comes the barrage of demands. When that doesn't work, they switch to the silent treatment. They're punishing you, expecting you to get anxious and come crawling back to them, begging for forgiveness and ready to comply. Don't fall for it. Hold the line." Her words strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about escaping a specific situation, it was about breaking a cycle that had defined my entire life. I was no longer the reliable, accommodating Helen. I was Helen, the architect of her own future. On Friday, just as the agent had predicted, a formal offer came in. It was for the full asking price, with no conditions and a quick closing date. It was perfect. The escape plan was no longer a calculation on a spreadsheet. It was a reality, waiting for my signature. I thought about my family, blissfully unaware, probably assuming my silence was a pout they could eventually overcome. They had no idea that I wasn't just refusing their plan. I was executing a far more permanent one of my own. The following week was a whirlwind of calcula. Clandestine activity. While my family was likely stewing in their silent, manipulative standoff, I was mobilizing. I accepted the offer on my house, and the legal machinery whirred into motion. Inspections were scheduled, documents were prepared, and a closing date was set for just 3 weeks away. It was an aggressive timeline, but the buyers were motivated, and so was I. Every day that passed felt like a victory. The biggest challenge was clearing out my house without raising suspicion. I couldn't just rent a large moving truck and park it in the driveway. My parents lived close enough that a neighbor might mention it to them. I had to dismantle my life in secret. I started with the small things. I went through closets and drawers, filling box after box with clothes, books, and personal items I didn't need for the immediate future. I rented a small storage unit across town, and late each evening, I would load up my car and ferry the boxes over, like a spy moving sensitive intelligence. Each box I packed felt like shedding a layer of my old life. I found old photo albums, full of pictures where I was on the periphery, looking slightly awkward, while Ethan was in the center, beaming. I found birthday cards from my parents with generic, pre-written verses, always with a $5 bill tucked inside, even into my 20s, as if I were perpetually a child. I didn't feel sentimental. I felt detached, as if I were curating a museum exhibit of a life that was no longer mine. I packed it all away. I sold most of my large furniture online. My dining table, my sofa, the guest bed that had never hosted a guest but was earmarked for Ethan. I listed them for low prices with the condition of immediate pickup. People were happy to get a bargain, and I was happy to see the empty spaces they left behind. My house began to echo, feeling less like a home and more like a transition point. This physical act of letting go was profoundly liberating. I was untethering myself from the material things that had made my home a target. During this time, I also found a new apartment. It was a modern one-bedroom in a secure building with a balcony overlooking a park. It was smaller than my house, but it felt infinitely larger in terms of freedom. It was a place they had never seen, in a neighborhood they didn't know. It was a blank slate. I signed the lease and set the move-in date for the day after my house sale closed. Millie checked in on me constantly, a constant source of encouragement. "How are you holding up?" she asked one night. "Honestly, I've never felt better," I told her, and it was the truth. "I feel light. All these years I thought their approval was something I needed to survive, but I'm surviving just fine without it. The silence is actually peaceful." The silence from my family was indeed deafening. A full week had passed with not a single word. As Millie predicted, they were trying to punish me, to make me feel the cold sting of their disapproval. They expected me to break. They had no idea that their silence was the greatest gift they could have given me. It gave me the time and space to execute my plan without interference. The day came to sign the final closing documents. I met the buyers, a sweet young couple expecting their first child, at the lawyer's office. They were so excited, talking about which room would be the nursery and how much they loved the backyard. Seeing their genuine joy erased any lingering doubt I might have had. My house was going to a family that would cherish it, that would build their own dreams within its walls. It wasn't being turned into a crash pad for my entitled brother. It was a happy ending for the house, and a new beginning for me. I sat at the long, polished table, a stack of papers in front of me. The lawyer walked me through each one, explaining the legal jargon. My hand was steady as I picked up the pen. With each signature, I felt a chain breaking. I was signing away more than just a piece of property. I was signing away the role of the family scapegoat. I was signing away the expectation that my success existed only to cushion my brother's failures. I was signing away years of resentment and obligation. I was signing away my past so that I could finally have a future. When the last page was signed, the lawyer smiled and shook my hand. "Congratulations, Helen. The funds will be transferred to your account by the end of the day." I walked out of that office into the bright afternoon sun and took a deep breath. It was done. I was officially homeless, and I had never felt more secure. The only thing left to do was to attend one last Sunday dinner and watch the fireworks. The following Sunday, I drove to my parents' house for what I knew would be the last time. I felt strangely calm, like an actor who had rehearsed her lines to perfection, waiting for the curtain to rise. I hadn't spoken to any of them in nearly 3 weeks. My sudden appearance, I knew, would be seen as a surrender. They would think their silent treatment had worked, that I had come to capitulate. I walked in without knocking, just as I always had. They were all in the living room, their expressions a mixture of surprise and smug satisfaction. "Well, look who decided to show up," my mother said, her voice laced with faux sweetness. She was trying to sound forgiving, but the triumphant glint in her eye was unmistakable. "Hello," I said calmly, taking a seat in the armchair furthest from them. "We were worried, Helen," my father said, folding his newspaper. It was a lie, and we all knew it. They weren't worried, they were annoyed that I had inconvenienced their plans. Ethan, lounging on the sofa, just smirked. "Finally ready to be a team player?" he asked, his tone oozing condescension. I ignored him and looked directly at my mother. "I came because I assume we still have things to discuss." My mother's face brightened. This was what she wanted to hear, my compliance. "Excellent, I'm so glad you've come to your senses. It was very childish of you to ignore us, you know. We've already started packing some of Ethan's things. He can be ready to move in next Saturday." She said it with an air of finality, as if generously rescheduling a meeting I had foolishly missed. "That might be a problem," I said, keeping my voice level. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a tense confusion. "A problem?" my mother repeated, her voice sharp. "What problem? We've given you 3 weeks to get used to the idea, Helen. The discussion is over." We moved to the dining table, the air thick with unspoken tension. The meal was served in near silence. They were waiting for me to break, to apologize, to explain myself. I ate my food slowly, methodically. I let them wait. It was my father who finally cracked. "So, Helen," he said, clearing his throat, "what's this problem you mentioned?" I placed my fork down and dabbed my mouth with my napkin. I looked from my mother to my father, and finally to my brother, who was watching me with a look of pure annoyance. It was time. My mom jumped in before I could speak. "Before you start with any excuses, Helen, let's be clear. Your brother is moving into your place while he gets back on his feet. It is happening. He needs a stable environment, and you're going to provide it. It's what a good sister, a good daughter, does." I took a deep breath and gave a small, polite nod. "I understand your position completely," I said, my voice betraying no emotion. "And you know, you're right, he can certainly move in." I paused, letting the statement hang in the air. My mother's face relaxed into a triumphant smile. Ethan leaned back, victorious. Then I delivered the final line. "Sure, if the new owners don't mind." A silence. It was absolute. My mother's smile froze, then slowly collapsed into a mask of utter disbelief. Ethan's smug expression vanished, replaced by a blank stare. And my dad, my quiet, complicit father, froze mid-bite, a forkful of mashed potatoes hovering halfway to his mouth. His eyes were wide with shock. He was the first to speak, his voice a choked whisper. "Owners." My mother found her voice next, and it was shrill. "What did you say? What new owners? What are you talking about, Helen?" "I'm talking about the lovely young couple who bought my house," I explained calmly. "The sale closed on Friday. I moved all my things out yesterday. They get the keys tomorrow morning. So, as I said, if Ethan wants to move in, he'll have to take it up with them. Though I'm not sure they have a spare room, they told me they were planning on making it a nursery. The detonation was bigger than I could have imagined. My mother shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You sold your house? You sold your house without telling us?" she shrieked, her face turning a blotchy red. "Why would I tell you?" I asked, my voice still quiet. "It was my house, my asset, my decision. You made it very clear that you saw it as a resource for the family, so I decided to liquidate it." "You did this to spite us," Ethan yelled, finally understanding that his free ride had just been permanently canceled. "Because you're selfish, you didn't stand to help your own brother for a few months." "A few months?" I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "Ethan, you haven't been on your own 2 feet for your entire life. This wasn't going to be a few months. This was going to be my life. Me, working in my kitchen, while you lived rent-free in my office, pursuing another dream that would lead nowhere. Me, paying the mortgage while you invested in the tools of the trade. No, thank you. Your father and I have sacrificed everything for you children." My mother cried, tears of rage welling in her eyes. "No," I said, standing up now, my own voice finally rising. "You sacrificed my childhood, my opportunities, my peace of mind for him. I worked for everything I have. He was given everything he has. And then you had the audacity to try and give him my house, too. The one thing I built for myself away from all of you. You didn't ask. You told me. You drew up the blueprints for my life, and you didn't even think to consult the person living in it, so I drew new ones." My father finally put his fork down, his face pale. "Where are you living, Helen?" he asked, his voice weak. "I have an apartment," I said. "And no, you will not have the address. You will not have a key. You have lost the privilege of knowing where I live." I picked up my purse and walked towards the door. My mother was sobbing now, a mixture of fury and self-pity. My brother was staring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. My father just looked broken. For a fleeting second, I felt a pang of something, but it wasn't guilt. It was pity. They had built their entire family dynamic on a faulty foundation, me, and I had just pulled the support beam out. The whole rotten structure was collapsing in on them. "I hope you have room in your basement, Mom," I said as I opened the door. "Because it looks like Ethan is moving back home." I walked out and didn't look back. The weeks that followed the dinner table detonation were characterized by a profound and gratifying silence. I had expected an extinction-level burst of angry voicemails, manipulative texts, and perhaps even attempts to recruit other family members to lecture me on my duties as a daughter. But there was nothing. It seemed my final act had been so far outside their realm of possibility, so completely and utterly final, that it had short-circuited their entire system. They didn't know how to react to a Helen who held all the cards. I settled into my new apartment, a space that felt entirely my own. The first morning I woke up there, the sun streamed through the large balcony doors, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized was missing from my life. There was no lingering dread of an unexpected pop-in from my mother, no anxiety about an impending call for help from Ethan. My phone was quiet. My mind was quiet. My life was finally, blessedly, quiet. I threw myself into creating my new home. I bought new furniture that was my taste, not something practical that could withstand an entitled brother. I set up my home office in a sunny corner of the living room, a space I chose, not one I was relegated to. Every little decision, from the color of the bath towels to the art on the walls, was mine and mine alone. It was a revelation. About a month after the final dinner, I got a call from a cousin I was moderately close to. "Hey, Helen," she started, her voice hesitant. "Your mom called my mom. Things sound intense over there." "I'm sure they are," I said neutrally. "Yeah, well, apparently Ethan did move back in with them," she continued, a hint of amusement in her tone. "And he's driving them absolutely insane. He treats the place like a hotel, leaves his stuff everywhere, plays loud music. My mom said your mom called her to complain for an hour straight. She said she doesn't know how you put up with it." I had to smile at the irony. "I didn't," I said simply. My cousin laughed. "Yeah, I guess not. Anyway, she was trying to get me to find out your new address. Don't worry, I told her I had no idea. Good for you, by the way. Seriously. That conversation confirmed what I already suspected. The problem hadn't been me, it had been them. They hadn't wanted to deal with the consequences of how they'd raised Ethan, so they had tried to outsource the problem to me. Now, they were stuck with him. They were finally reaping what they had spent 3 decades sowing. The peace and quiet of their retirement, which they had deemed more important than my own, was gone. A few more months passed. The silence from my immediate family remained unbroken. I saw on social media that Ethan had launched his brand consultancy. His page was full of generic inspirational quotes and blurry photos of him pretending to work at coffee shops. It had 12 followers, 3 of whom were my mom, my dad, and his own backup account. It was, like all his other ventures, a spectacular failure. The money from the house sale sat in a high-yield savings. See count, a quiet testament to my independence. I used some of it to book a trip to Italy, something I'd always wanted to do but never felt I could justify spending the money on. As I sat at a cafe in Florence, sipping a cappuccino and watching the world go by, I realized I wasn't just financially free, I was emotionally free. I was no longer living my life in relation to their expectations or their crises. I was just living. One evening, after I got back from my trip, an email popped up in my inbox. The sender was my father. The subject line just said, "Helen." I hesitated for a long moment before opening it. The message was short. "Your mother is struggling," he wrote. "Ethan is still here. It is not easy. I hope you are well, Dad." There was no apology. There was no acknowledgement of their role in the situation. It was a subtle, pathetic attempt to lay a new guilt trip at my door. The old Helen would have felt a pang of responsibility. The old Helen would have called, would have offered to help mediate, would have been drawn back into the vortex of their dysfunction. But I was the new Helen. I looked at his words, recognizing them for what they were: a test, a hook to see if the old dynamic could be reestablished. I thought about a response. I could have been angry, I could have been righteous, but I chose to be neither. I chose to be free. I selected the email, and without typing a single word in reply, I moved it to the trash. Then, I went about my evening, the sound of silence my new favorite song.